known to be the school that strives to be the safest, most welcoming, and accepting. Every member of the Woodrow Wilson community should feel empowered to make a positive change. They provide new hope and empowerment to students of all backgrounds. A couple of points on Woodrow Wilson himself. Some of his positive contributions include his economic reform, movement towards internationalism, and the drafting of the 14 points, which would lead to the formation of the League of Nations. He also passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. I can give him props for that one. But negatively, Wilson was often known for his blatant and outright racism. He tolerated no expression during the war and authorized serious violations of American civil liberties in his quest for victory. He supported segregation and did little to stop waves of anti-Black violence and race riots during his administration. He often referred to Eastern and Southern Europeans as men's lowest class. And he praised the motion picture Birth of a Nation, which denounced Reconstruction and hailed the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Woodrow Wilson's morally repugnant behavior has a significant effect on the school's mission, and retaining this name creates an environment that may impair the ability of students of certain protected classes. I'd like to do a little reflection on history, starting with July 4th, 1776, when the Americans declared their independence from the British. I find this to be very ironic, considering it took until December 18th, 1865, to free the slaves from us, and the 13th Amendment was passed. Following this, we can appreciate the courage of those that participated in sit-ins and peaceful protests, such as the March on Washington, led by Martin Luther King. Let's fast forward to today and take a look at the world around us. It doesn't seem much different than the 50s and 60s. I think this is a particularly hard pill for my generation to swallow. I'm not sure if this has to do with the fact that we're a progressive generation and we adapt easily to change, and we aren't seeing very much of it. Or if it's because we grew up in the era of President Barack Obama, America's first African-American president. He gave so many Americans hope that the color of their skin, who they loved, or which God they praised, would no longer be a source of inequality, but prosperity. So looking back on these last 4 short years, it's hard for me to not acknowledge how many steps backwards we have taken, and not renaming this school is just another step back. Woodrow Wilson's public persona is not a good representation for the Woodrow Wilson community. This school serves a large number of minorities and is known to be accepting of all, and they encourage students to see the beauty and diversity and not the differences. Woodrow Wilson did not encompass or promote any of these points. Is this a race issue? Yes, absolutely it is. But I also think that this is a moral issue. And I think this gives us a good opportunity to examine where our morals lie. And mine lie with the name change of Woodrow Wilson High School. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Kevin Cassidy Malone.
My name is Kevin Cassidy Maloney. I live at 3159 17th Street South, Unit A in Fargo. And I speak tonight. I'm grateful to be here as part of the faith community. I serve as pastor at First Congregational United Church of Christ here in Fargo. So I speak in that capacity, but also as a concerned citizen. To begin with, some theological background. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the prophet Jeremiah receives the call from the divine. The divine says, "See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant." We're always making choices in education, and the choice of what to name a school has great significance in the statement it makes about the tenor of the education within those walls. Once upon a time, it may have made sense to name a school after President Woodrow Wilson, based on his vision of the League of Nations, his work in leading the country through World War I, and as was mentioned, his work finally in supporting women's suffrage. But further educational work has revealed that it's not such a good choice in today's context. Changing the name of Woodrow Wilson School represents an opportunity in that Jeremiah framework to build and to plant something new and meaningful. Theologically, the message of Jesus is all about love, love of neighbor. Jesus says at one point, as he welcomes all kinds of children, "If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." Jesus often spoke in hyperbole. But retaining the name Woodrow Wilson School is, I believe, exactly that kind of stumbling block being put in front of our children and youth. The Apostle Paul said, "If one member of the body suffers, we all suffer." Seems to me no one wins when racism is left unchallenged. So why is it necessary to change the name of Woodrow Wilson School? Wilson is deemed by most responsible scholars as racist, even by the standards of his time. That's a difficult thing as we go back and look at people in history, but even by the standards of his time, he's deemed as being quite racist. He resegregated many agencies of government that had been surprisingly integrated during the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. And unfortunately, President Wilson strengthened and defended Jim Crow laws. Upon taking office, he fired 15 of 17 black supervisors and replaced them with white people. In a 1913 open letter to Wilson, W.E.B. Du Bois, who had supported Wilson in the 1912 election before being disenchanted by his segregation policies, wrote of, quote, "one colored clerk who could not actually be segregated on account of the nature of his work, and who consequently had a cage built around him to separate him from his white companions of many years." Biographer Patricia O'Toole notes, "President Wilson is still remembered as the president who repressed dissent more often and more harshly than any other occupant of the White House." And according to an article from Sojourners magazine, in the end, Wilson conjures up a disturbing double image. He is both a modern progressive internationalist, a prophet of globalized 21st century America, and at the same time, a tyrannical racist, deeply uneasy with all who come from racial or national backgrounds and outside of his narrowly defined social set. As a local pastor and as a citizen of Fargo, I urge you to change the name of Woodrow Wilson School to something that is more inclusive of the wonderful and wide diversity of students and staff comprising the Fargo school system. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Kevin. Mark DeSalle.
Hi, I'm here on the same point. I want to correct something from two earlier speakers who are under the false impression that Woodrow Wilson was in favor of women's suffrage. He was totally against women's suffrage. There's no question about this. Any 10-minute Google search will make it very clear to you. Once the states ratified the women's vote, he had no choice but to sign it into law. He did not do it willingly. He was a complete paternalist, white supremacist. Before coming here, I just sat down and did a little Google search. Woodrow Wilson at the top. First thing is the Wikipedia page. Next item down, because I live close to here, is Woodrow Wilson's school and map, pointing to the school here in the map. And the third point down is the Atlantic article, "The Racist Legacy of Woodrow Wilson," from November. Here's the thing, people my age, when this school was named, when Woodrow Wilson School was named, he was president. And at that point, when this school was named, if you objected to the war he'd gotten us into, World War I, if you objected to our being in that war, you were thrown in jail. He managed to do something no other president has ever managed to do, which is he turned America into a fascist state. If you objected to the war he got us into, you were thrown in jail. There are well-documented cases of people being killed in jail because he had managed to take a certain percentage of the population and convince them that to be anti-Wilson or anti-World War I was to be completely unpatriotic. And so it's the closest we ever got to what Germany was in the 30s. And he did that because he not only had bad instincts, but he was absolutely brilliant. So then follows, after the racist legacy of Woodrow Wilson on the Google search, a number of articles. Wilson the Worst by political scientist Jeff Taylor. Why Woodrow Wilson was the worst U.S. president ever by Robert W. Mary. The worst president, Woodrow Wilson by conservative Warren Rosen. You don't find a whole lot of subjects on which the Cato Institute and the Huffington Post agree. They all agree on this. We grew up in a time when we were taught, George Washington chopped down the cherry tree, and Columbus was this wonderful guy who didn't burn people in cages and that kind of thing. And that's when this school was named. And we celebrated great men of great strength who did great things. And they were sometimes terrible things. And this guy is number one worst president ever. The opposite of what Fargo is, the opposite of what this school stands for. So I urge you to change the name as quickly as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Martin Avery.
Yeah, my name is Martin Avery. I'm a pastor and father of a first grade student here in Fargo. I live at 434 7th Avenue South. As a pastor, I feel I must lead with a bit of scripture, and I bring forward these words from the Hebrew Bible. I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their suffering from Exodus. In the times in which we are living, there is no way that we can claim that we are unaware of injustice against people of color in our nation. iPhone videos have brought forward to a broad audience what has been no secret to people living on the margins. It's getting harder and harder to claim ignorance. And with an awareness comes responsibility for action to stop further oppression and to seek remedies for past actions. Recent awareness has inspired a closer look into our history and what from that history we wish to hold up as representing our shared values. Princeton University, which has much closer ties to former President Wilson, appointed a committee back in 2015 to look at renaming their public policy school. And it doesn't surprise me that this committee, until just recently, there was nothing that came about changing the name until what has come to light with increasing awareness across the nation. Princeton has just recently finally made that decision to announce this past June that it would be changing the name. But that is the nature of committee. Often committee can study something to death. They stated when they made the decision to change it, they said when a university names a school of public policy for a political leader, it inevitably suggests that the honorary is a model for students who study at that school. And this searing moment in American history has made clear that Wilson's racism disqualifies him from that role. Now, one of the issues that comes from our technology that we have with the ability to gather information quickly is that as quickly as it comes into our conscience, it often leaves our conscience just as quickly. It is this fact that makes it important to act quickly when we see opportunities to recognize past ills. It's important not to get bogged down in concern over a process. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech, a portion that is not often quoted, King wrote, "This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism." King, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, said in response to religious leaders who are concerned at the pace of the civil rights movement, he wrote, "It is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privilege through painful experience, that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed. For years now, I've heard the word wait. This wait has almost always meant never. So we must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And I would like the board, in response to this, to think through this and to move quickly and to take action in removing the Woodrow Wilson name from its school. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Karen Von Fossum?
Hello, my name is Reverend Karen Van Fossen. My address is 1002 Oak Street North, number 1, here in beautiful Fargo. I am minister at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, not too far north of here, and I'm honored to speak with you for a very short while this evening. First, I'd like to thank you for the sacred work that you do. You have the lives and well-being of thousands of human beings and their families in your hands, and I appreciate that. And it is in honor and appreciation of your sacred work that I think we've come to speak with you this evening about another opportunity. The work that you do is often complicated. What to do about COVID, what to do about budgets, what to do about this and that. We suggest to you that renaming the Woodrow Wilson High School is really not that complicated. His history is clear. The effect on students of many backgrounds is clear. The details about stationery and other things will work themselves out like details always do. But this really isn't that complicated an issue among all the complications that you address and will as soon as we're done speaking to you this evening. Woodrow Wilson was a profoundly racist human being, as you've heard already, even by the standards of his time and, more importantly, his context. He was called out for this racism in his lifetime. He had opportunities to learn and grow, like we hope that the children and young people in our care will also have. We heard tonight Faith Dixon say that the Woodrow Wilson school name is humiliating. We heard Teresa Larry say that they hated attending school by that name. I'm not in high school anymore, but I too would hate attending a school by that name. And I would hate for my Euro-American children and grandchildren to attend a school by that name. It would be humiliating for me. I want my children and my grandchildren and my congregation and my town and my world to be based in what are the good things about being human. What do we value? Who can we be? Woodrow Wilson is no one I want to emulate. And as a white person in our time, struggling to understand how I can be fully human and fully anti-racist now and for the rest of my life, the Woodrow Wilson school name humiliates me. I want to do better. I want us to do better. And I trust that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Amy Mueller.
Hi, Amy Mueller, 229 24th Avenue North, Fargo. And I am here today to address you guys. I am the mother of a first grader at Washington Elementary, which is a great school. But I feel that you guys need to reconsider your hybrid or your whole plan for the school year. I think it's pretty detrimental and it's a big disservice to our children to allow them, especially the younger ones, to sit in front of an iPad basically and try to learn how to read and write. My son just had the first day of distance learning today, and it was, I thought it was pretty miserable. You know, there was a 10-minute video on there to do gym, and a 2-minute video from his teacher, and a 5-minute activity that he had to do for some writing, and then he's supposed to read for 20 minutes alone. So I just hope you guys reconsider and let the younger kids go back to school full-time. I know in his class there's only 14 students. I don't understand why you guys can't allow all of them to go back to school full-time. So, and the death rate, I mean, it's 0.02% in North Dakota. And these kids, if they aren't in school, the younger ones, then they're going to daycare. So then they're around 2 separate sets of kids. So it kind of defeats the purpose of not being in school full-time. So.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks to everyone that was here this evening to share your thoughts. We're going to move on to the staff reports for our meeting. You're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. If you need to leave, you're free to leave as well. So the first item on staff reports is AP 3260. That is the policy that has to do with the naming of our school buildings, and I will turn this over to Dr. Gandhi. This is in connection to much of what the public shared this evening in terms of your thoughts. Dr. Gandhi.
Sure. Thank you, Board President Knudsen. At our last board meeting, and I think in recent times, this board has had several conversations around the Woodrow Wilson school name, and at our last board meeting, we had an extensive discussion around the lack of a process in Fargo Public Schools or in policy that defines how do we approach reconsideration of existing facility names. That means 2 things. One is, what does the process actually look like in engaging in that process? And then secondly, what are the standards that we can define to assess the names of our facilities moving forward that could hopefully withhold, at least for the time being, the current time, and we can use those standards to define any requests that we have for name reconsiderations. So what we have in front of you today is a change to existing Administrative Policy 3260. This used to be a policy on naming school facilities. We are proposing, or what administration is doing, is redoing this administrative policy to consider naming and renaming schools. It is modeled after a university policy that Tamara will speak about, and I'll ask our Director of Equity and Inclusion, Ms. Tamara Usselman, to come and kind of walk through that change in that AP policy. Now, this is an administrative policy, so it's not here for board review, but we are presenting it to the board and here to answer any questions per EL 10, which states that if there's any policy that can be controversial in nature or which the board deems controversial, any updates should be provided to the school board.
Tamara, welcome. Thank you for being here. I did want to mention some of the language that's included in the cover memo addresses a motion that was made and passed at our August 11th board meeting that directed the Communications, Engagement, and Advocacy Committee to add to their annual work plan a community engagement exercise to consider the school naming policy and include a school renaming process consideration. That committee met last week. Tamara was at that meeting, so was Dr. Gandhi, and at that meeting, the committee was presented with recommendations from administration in terms of this policy and had an opportunity to provide some feedback. And that feedback has been included and shows here for what you're looking at this evening. So I wanted members of the public and the rest of the board to know that that committee did the work that was the initial work that was requested, and that we greatly thank those involved in helping to put the information together. Thank you, Tamara.
Chair Knudsen, members of the board, Superintendent Gandhi, and staff, my name is Tamara Usselman. I'm the Director of Equity Inclusion for Fargo Public. I was here for the board's previous discussion and understand that a policy was requested. So this policy is based on the work from Stanford University, and what we have done is lift some of that language and then mesh it with an existing board policy on naming buildings. So if it is the request, Chair Knudsen, that I go through the policy, is that
I would appreciate that. It helped us greatly at the committee meeting last week, and I think for those of us that weren't able to hear that dialogue, and again, for members of the public, especially, we've had so many people contacting us and engaging with us, that I believe it deserves that time. So thank you.
Naming and renaming of Fargo Public Schools buildings and other spaces. This is Administrative Policy 3260. Fargo Public Schools is committed to maintaining high standards of integrity and to provide a welcoming and inclusive environment for all members of the Fargo community. The Board of Education recognizes that the naming and/or renaming of a Fargo Public Schools building or space is of great importance, and it deserves thoughtful attention. The process for naming new buildings or spaces. In selecting a name, the board will consider names of national or state significance. Additionally, the board will give consideration to names that have special significance to the area or to people who've made a significant contribution to education or to the school system. The process for naming a new building will begin as soon as its construction has become a financial reality, the site has been selected, and the architect has been appointed. The Board of Education, with the assistance from the administration, will solicit proposed names from the community. Community, by definition, includes staff, students, and patrons. Administration will develop a process that invites residents within the district to submit proposed names for the new building or space. Individual board members may also submit suggestions to be included on the list. Then the final selection is made by a vote of the board. Each school board member will choose up to 5 names from the list of submitted names. Board members will then rank these names up to 45, if everyone had 5 different names. And the highest ranking name would be the one selected. In the case of ties, board members will vote for the highest ranked names until a majority supports a proposed name. As you can see, much of that was existing language, and what's been added is the process for renaming and then also recognizing that there'll be spaces other than just the building. The honorary naming of buildings or other school spaces is your next section. Buildings or portions thereof or other school spaces may be named in honor of an individual through 2 different processes, 2 different procedures. First, honorary naming through financial contribution. A process is outlined in Administrative Policy 3255, Sponsorship and School Business Partnerships. And again, this is language that you've had in your naming policy. Under this policy, a stadium, field, theater, library, or gymnasium may be named, given a contribution of 25% of the cost of the project. Application of this policy might result in a facility named for a company or an individual. It's anticipated that this may be appropriate at times when buildings are being built, remodeled, or added onto. It's conceivable as well that such honorary efforts might make the difference between a project being realized or not, or between its being merely adequate versus exempt. Procedure is honorary naming without financial contribution. And again, this has sat in your policy for some time. At times, there may be appropriate opportunities to honor individuals who have distinguished themselves through their association with the school district, either as alumni, employees, or community members. Such honorary naming may be applied to a new school, provided the name is suggested as part of the process outlined, which we went over already, or it may be applied to an existing building or a portion thereof. The board will apply the following guidelines in considering any individual's name proposed for the facility or portion thereof. Your general guidelines. Nominee has had a significant long-term relationship with the Fargo Public Schools. Nominee has demonstrated excellence in their field. Nominee has achieved local, regional, and national recognition for achievements. Nominee has held local, regional, and national leadership roles in the field of expertise. Nominee has widespread support from colleagues, parents, and students. Nominee, if a former Fargo Public Schools employee, will have been retired or gone from the district employment for a minimum of 2 years. The next section is naming authority. The board has a final authority on the selection of the name of a school building or other school space. The board has the discretion to name existing facilities to recognize individuals who meet nomination criteria with or without financial requirements of Administrative Policy 3255. Recognition plaque. In keeping with the practice of recognizing elected officials and others for their efforts in public service in providing newer and/or improved when the evidence is scant or ambiguous. The next relevant factor, the Fargo Public Schools' prior consideration of the issues. The case for renaming is stronger when the namesake's offensive conduct came to light after the naming and/or not the subject of prior consideration. The case for renaming is weaker when the Fargo Public School addressed the behavior at the time of the naming and nonetheless decided to honor the person, or when the Fargo Public Schools has already considered and rejected a prior request for renaming, provided the following: the decision makers considered the competing interest, relevant facts were not missing, or if the namesake's questionable behavior at the time of the naming was left unaddressed. And then your last relevant factor, possibilities for mitigation. In considering whether to retain or eliminate a name, the Fargo Public Schools should take into account whether the harm can be mitigated and historical knowledge preserved by recognizing and addressing the individual's wrongful behavior. When a school building or other space is renamed, or when the name is retained but the committee considers it a close question, the Fargo Public Schools should consider describing the history in a prominent way at the school building or other space where practicable or in some other suitable location. So the recommendation process works as you see. The committee will submit a written recommendation to the Board of Education applying these guidelines to the facts of the case. These guidelines may be elaborated or even modified in the course of their application over time. The superintendent may, at any time, reconvene a committee to reconsider the guidelines. The superintendent and committee chair will bring forth a finalized committee recommendation to the Board of Education. And finally, rescinding and renaming authority. The Board of Education has the final authority on rescinding the name of a school building or other space. Should the Board of Education determine to rescind the name, the naming process herein shall commence immediately. I'll stand for any questions, Chair Knutson, if you have them, or members of the board.
Thank you, Tamara. Dr. Gandhi, do you have any thoughts right now? And then I'd open it up to the board for questions or comments.
No thoughts. I think just in terms of a process, I think there's two things. One is at the last board meeting, we were asked to, there was a motion to create a process, which is what you have in front of you for the reconsideration of school names. And then there was also a process to re-examine the name Woodrow Wilson by the board's Communication Engagement and Advocacy Committee. So with this policy revision today and sharing that with the board and, based on the board's feedback, what we would do is, I know that the board's Communication Engagement and Advocacy Committee does plan to immediately meet and reconsider the name Woodrow Wilson. Although this policy outlines a process for the public or any stakeholder to begin that process, just because this process wasn't in place, I think the committee has felt that they already have some information enough and the board's motion to begin examining that name using the standards established here within. I do believe that Tamara's intention would be to reach out to any speaker tonight or previously that's shared concerns about the Woodrow Wilson name and provide them with an opportunity to resubmit their concerns using these standards if that's something that they want to do, and for the committee to consider as well, and then bring a recommendation to the board. That was my understanding from the committee meeting, but I know the committee chair is here as well, so if they want to say otherwise, they certainly can.
Nikki, would you like to speak to that since you're the committee chair? We have a meeting coming up very soon.
Sure. Thank you, President Knutson. I am very excited that our committee was able to get together so quickly and that administration was able to bring us a policy, revisions to it and additions to it so we could continue this work as quickly as possible. Looking forward to our meeting this week now where we can use these guidelines and put this name through its paces. This has also set a good precedent, I think, should we face this situation again in the future. So I think it's important to have these guidelines in place. I know it appears it slows us down a little bit, but we do want to be well prepared for the future. So yeah, the next thing we will look forward to doing then is putting that building and its name through the paces and coming out the other side.
Thank you, Nikki. And the committee meets this Thursday at 7:30 a.m. in the school district office. School building. Tamara.
Chair Knutson and members of the board, Dr. Gandhi and staff, I just wanted to make certain that the people who have presented about the Woodrow Wilson building and given background do not need to resubmit anything. The intent is just to say if there was something that was missed, certainly your opportunity would not be lost. So you were heard, I think, in great detail. And I can't speak for the board, but certainly there's an understanding for me personally. I just didn't want to shortcut anybody from adding additional information if they so desired. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Any members of the board have questions or comments? Robin?
Thank you to administration and the committee for doing this very important work. I think having the policy in place really sets in stone the final decision by the board, and it's less likely to be challenged. Under the initiating the process of reconsidering the name of a school building or other space, I have some sequential questions. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So it talks about upon receipt of the request, the superintendent or school board president may make further inquiries and request a review by the board's committee to study the request and bring forth a recommendation to maintain or rescind the name of the board to the Board of Education. So is the committee being asked to make that recommendation before soliciting community feedback? I'm a little nervous about the sequence of the steps, and I want to make sure that before a recommendation is made by the committee, that they would try to put that process in place. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding the sequence here.
No, great question. The way I read this is there's two recommendations. One is, does the committee chair or board president or the superintendent even bring a recommendation for the committee to start the process? And I think that's what we're talking about. And starting the process means starting the process to engage in the community, and then when all of that is done and the community's applied these standards, they would then make a recommendation to the board if they chose to do so. So sometimes as administration, as I referenced in the last meeting, we get calls to rename a building or something, and there really isn't insufficient evidence. So in that situation, we would not bring a recommendation to the community communication engagement advocacy committee if we don't even feel like there's enough to warrant that consideration.
Go ahead.
So just food for thought. I know this is an administrative policy, it's not a board policy, but if you were to strike the last section of that paragraph, starting with upon the request, and strike the last about dozen words and bring forth a recommendation to maintain or rescind the name to the Board of Education, might be something you want to consider. I would prefer personally that the committee would study the request and then solicit the feedback before bringing a recommendation to maintain or rescind. But again, this is an administrative policy that puts a lot of pressure on that committee prior to soliciting feedback. Granted, they've heard feedback, but I think soliciting that feedback is maybe what has been missing in this process so far.
Sure, I think we can clarify that and maybe even send you some language to see if that clarifies the intent. Yep.
I trust you to do that.
Thank you, Robin. Any other board members have comments regarding the update to this policy?
Can I ask a
Yes, Tamara.
Chair Knutson, members of the board, Superintendent Gandhi, and staff, my question in regard to Board Member Nelson's comment, really, it makes me think. I think it's a really good comment. I just want to make certain I'm clear, the committee only brings forth the recommendation and then the board deliberates that and would, I think, through a regular board meeting, engage with the community. I don't know one way or the other, but it seems dubious to me that outside this example, the board would make a decision in one meeting, and maybe that's where your community engagement comes from the full board. So I just wanted to offer that.
Does that make sense, Robin? Help address your
It does, I
concern?
respect that. I just want to make sure that we're sequentially approaching this in the right way, and that kind of skips a step before engaging and soliciting the feedback in a more formal manner.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm tracking too, Tamara, with what you said. I think that helps clarify things. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, we are not voting on this because it's an AP policy, but we appreciate the time dedicated to this matter because I think we all know it's quite important. Anyone else have any other questions before we move on to the next item? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the FEA report. Kim Belgard, welcome.
Good evening, school board members and Dr. Gandhi. I visited most of the elementary schools. I have about 6 left to visit the next week, so that's been a big task, but very nice. It was the first time I was able to get into the Eagles and Ed Clapp, so it tells you how busy teachers are. They don't even see all the school buildings in this district. I'm sure you're aware that our virtual academy is the largest elementary school in this district. There's many challenges using Seesaw, Dreambox, kids moving in and out, and the overloads in each teacher's classroom. So it's a lot of work to be done still. The overwhelming workload of new tasks and feeling of being unsuccessful across our district for teachers. I hope that you can help me to keep them informed of flexibility of this district, and it's okay to make mistakes and keep moving forward. Positive, there's been a lot of training for teachers. On the negative, there's been a lot of training. There's just not enough time, it feels like, for them to learn and implement all of this in their new teaching tasks. In considering our hybrid model, we started our school year with a 22.5 per 10,000, and now we're at 32.15 per 10,000. Are we being proactive or reactive? We cannot just stay on the course. We must be preventative. I have seen a very high positive response to the meetings one-on-one with each family. It was a great time for teachers to get to know the parents as well as their student, a time for testing, and for lots of questions and answers. We are very hopeful with the FEA that the school board will accept the recommendation from our Health Insurance Committee, and as Jim Johnson has stated, that has never occurred to not accept the committee work. So we're hopeful that that goes through tonight. And I would also like you to take in consideration your ESP employees. We need them, we value them. Our paras need their 15-minute break to continue. This would be a great way of attracting and retaining our very valuable staff members. So please keep that in your minds as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and for everything you do and representation of the FEA and ultimately all teachers and staff in the school district during this challenging time. Dr. Gandhi for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Board President. I just want to start by saying tomorrow marks 1 week since the start of the school year. And again, just want to start by expressing my gratitude for all the staff in Fargo Public Schools that have worked incredibly hard. I think you've heard me say this before, not to make light of the situation at all, but really the name of the game for us at this point is to minimize who can get identified as close contact, because close contacts are individuals that if and when there is a positive case in our schools that have to quarantine, and that can create a significant impact if it's a larger group of students or even a larger group of staff. So I think that's where the ability to execute the protocols and follow a lot of the protocols that we put in place becomes absolutely critical for us as a school district. And really, we've seen those protocols really be successful in the first week already. I think it's no secret that there have been cases of COVID-19 positive results in our schools, and what we've been able to do is execute our protocols, follow the steps that we put in place, and work with Fargo Cast Public Health, and also to minimize the impact of that by reducing or saying that there are many close contacts to those students, and that hasn't resulted into having to shut down any one classroom or one building. So that really is a positive. I know that seems like a low note, but it's really speaks to our staff and the ability to follow some of the systems that we've had in place. Earlier today, we had our third FPS Instructional Plan Committee meeting, and you may have seen an email come out. Really, when we presented our FPS Smart Restart Plan at the July 30th work session, there was some extensive conversation around a decision that was made at that time where in level 3, middle school and high school students would transition to online learning. And that decision was made at that time because with the research that we had at that time, we just felt that the amount of close contacts that could result from students that go through 7 or 8 periods a day, and the amount of contacts that they could have switching classrooms, not being able to keep students in one classroom all day like we can do at the elementary school, can increase that risk. And additionally, coupled with the fact that there would be more students in the building was a concern, and that's why we had made that decision. Well, at our last Instructional Plan Committee meeting, as you know, the committee decided to follow and adopt the Minnesota model, is what we're calling it, the model that's based on our instructional plan level based on the county transmission rate. Well, today the committee discussed, I think it's important to honor the sentiment of the model, because we in Fargo Public Schools had defined hybrid as starting the school year on an A-B rotation, and then beginning October 5th, switch to online. When the model, if we're going to follow the model, we should use their definition for their terms. And then the authors of the model define hybrid as continuing hybrid, not switching to online. And they call online, which would be level 4 for us. So we as a committee thought it was important to be aligned with that sentiment. So we redid our plan in terms of redefining level 3, meaning if we are to stay in a level 3, or if we are in a level 3, then students would continue in that A-B rotation. I know many of community members and some of the feedback that you've received, there's been this assumption where the guided practice centers have been juxtaposed against the students going online. As I've said before, that was never the reason we proposed a guided practice center. The concept of a guided practice center came to light after we had made the decision that our secondary buildings could potentially have space if students go online. So we do continue to be able to provide the guided practice centers. We know that we are limited in physical space, but we are able to provide at least one at most, or if not all, of our elementary schools. And then also we're looking at the Agassiz building to be able to provide 10 classrooms. So earlier today we did notify some of the parents. I think we were able to accommodate at least 65 or 63% of the guided practice center requests that we have. We are working towards seeing if we can have increased capacity with staff and potential physical space, and if so, we will go down to our waiting list to be able to provide that. So that's kind of where we are, and that was the update that was provided today to our community regarding our Smart Restart Plan.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. Does anyone have questions regarding his report? All right. If we could take care of the consent agenda, then I believe we could take a break. Is there a motion for approval? Robin?
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented with the HR addendum.
Is there a second? Second. All right. Jim, I'll have you down as the second. All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. And if we could take a 10-minute break, that would be great, and then we'll start the business agenda.
The end of the first semester, and then start if we are in level 3 at that point. Remember, the guided practice center only happens if we're at level 3. But if we're in level 3 at the start of the second semester, then it would start at the start of the second semester and go until the last day. So I know before the Guided Practice Center was a little bit choppier, where towards the end of November there was a break and then it picked up. That would no longer be the case. It would run every day.
All right, thank you. And as we take our break, if we remember to wear our masks, that would be great. Thank you. So we will reconvene the meeting, starting with item A on the business agenda, Memo 36, the health insurance recommendation. Let's see, who would like to introduce this? Dr. Gandhi?
Jim, go.
Was there someone else?
Well, do you have somebody here?
So I'm going to introduce Karen Hollerung, who serves on our Health Insurance Committee, and she is here to present the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome.
Good evening, School Board, Madam President, FPS staff. Karen Hollerung, Purchasing Specialist with the Fargo Public Schools. I'm here on behalf of the Health Insurance Committee as the chair to present to you the recommendations that we have talked about over the past few months for the funds for the health insurance. So if you can see by Board Memo 36, we have the following discussions we have agreed upon and want to recommend to the board: an increase in health insurance funding level at an overall rate of 7.1%, increase employee cost share on both plans by 0.5%, maintain health savings account employee contribution at a single of $1,000, single plus dependent at $1,250, and family at $1,500. We also have changes to the Classic Blue plan design, and that will be outlined later. The table below shows a 10-month premium adjustment to the cost sharing. As you can see, calendar 2020, and I presented last year, we had a significant increase in premium cost. This year, we took the stand of looking at doing the plan design change to the Classic Blue instead of an overall hit in the adjustments in premiums. So for calendar 2020, you can see the cost for employee-employer share for both the Classic Blue and the Blue Saver, and then just a breakdown of what will be effective for the changes for the employee costs for Classic Blue, the employer costs, and then the Blue Saver employee-employer costs below. The back page will show the plan design that we're recommending for the Classic Blue. We wanted to take a look at, with our funding level and our overall costs that we have collected from premiums and what we paid out, we still came back at a deficit for our Classic Blue of $2 million, and then an overall deficit of $1.3 million as far as in our plan. And as a committee, we just can't keep continuing to lose that type of money in our self-funded. And majority of the committee has agreed that we should take a look at the plan change that we're proposing here for the Classic Blue. As you can see, the deductible went up by $500 for single plus dependent, and family. Our co-insurance went from 90/10 to 80/20. The annual out-of-pocket maximum for single went up by $500 in each of the categories. Your office visits went from a 10% co-insurance to 20%. And then the pharmacy went from a 25 copay plus 20% co-insurance to a 35 copay to a 20% co-insurance. So what I would like to present to the board members in that is the recommendation that you approve overall 7.1% funding level increase, the cost share increase of 0.5%, and the Classic Blue plan design. The 7.1% overall increase would be a 6% increase to the board and an 8.7% to the employee cost. Dollar-wise on that would be rounded at $860,000 for the contributions for the employer and $435,000 increase for the employee. And then we also have attached the breakdown of our budgeted for 2020 for the plans and then what actually took place for 2020, and then our proposed for 2021. So I'll open it up, see if anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you, Karen. And Jim, you serve on the committee. Thank you.
I'm brand new on the committee. Jennifer did all the hard lifting this last year. I just want to make it a formal motion that we approve the Health Insurance Committee recommendation for a 7.1% funding level increase and an employee cost share increase of 0.5% and Classic Blue plan change design as outlined in our memo.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Now, is there any discussion? David?
Karen, I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, if these changes in the Classic Blue plan, how much of a savings do you predict per year? How long is it going to take to make up the deficit we currently have?
That's a good question. If I had my crystal ball, I'd probably be able to help you on that, but it really depends on the usage. I mean, if people are due diligent as far as understanding how our health plan works and take it upon themselves to do, maybe telehealth, or do I really need an emergency visit? We're not going to be able to control, everyone as far as that, but as long as we can educate and get that information out to them. How long will it take us to get back to where we may not see funding level decreases as far as, the astronomical amounts that we've seen in the last 2 years? 10 years ago, we had a surplus of 9 months in reserve. Over the last 10 years, we've seen it go from that down to where we're at now, where we have probably a 3-month reserve. So as a committee, we want to be due diligent to make sure that we continue to strive to have that fund reserved and not have to look at going to maybe not being self-funded in the future. As far as knowing how much and how much time we're going to take to build that fund back up, we looked at last year as far as changing the increase as far as premium amounts. That didn't get us to where we needed to be. So we took a hard look and said, let's look at a plan design change and to see where we were going to get with it as far as the premiums.
Okay, the second part of my question is probably going to be just as impossible to answer as the first. But based on increasing the deductible, the out-of-pocket expense for office visits and so on, do you track what usage has been in the past? Do you have any idea how much more this is going to cost an average family that's on the plan by increasing the deductibles, the co-pays, and all of that?
We're looking at, last year it was an overall hit for everybody who was on the plan, whether you were using it or not using it or moderately using it. This year we took a look at it and say, okay, this is going to reflect the people who are utilizing the plan more. As far as the cost, like you see, they're gonna have like if I was a single person, I'm gonna have an additional $500 out of my pocket. I'm gonna have, a $500 extra maximum out of pocket. So I could be to where I know right up front that I'm gonna have $1,250 set aside if I have something major happen to me or, surgery. But on the flip side, like last year we had major premium increase, where this year on the Classic Blue, the single plan's going to go up only $15, a month compared to what we were last year. It was pretty substantial. So if you're not utilizing the plan, you're saving, your premium's going to be less as far as for paying, but if you're utilizing it, you're going to have that $500 increase for each of the deductibles plus the co-insurance.
I guess that brings up another question. Then, if you wouldn't have changed the plan, you probably would have had to look at another significant premium increase?
We thought about that, but since we did it last year, I don't think anybody would be able to take another hit like that. That was a lot, and we thought we'll try the premium increase, see what it gets us with the plan for that Classic Blue, which we still lost $2 million in that plan itself. So we figured let's look at the plan design change and see where that happens. And that was a recommendation from Gallagher, who we work with as far as on our health insurance committee.
Robin?
Thank you for all your work on this. This is what we're going through at my employment, too. I am fully in support of the motion on the floor. So I assume your work isn't done for the year. So what is the work plan to make this sustainable, closer to sustainable in the future? What is your goal for months cash on hand, or you have your actuarials to look back on, but what's the plan going forward? Because we want to make sure that we have a strong health insurance plan for our staff. And I don't know if you can answer that, or Jim. I know Jim is kind of an expert in insurance.
I don't know if I'm an expert, but we have had a specific request that it came up at the planning meeting. I'll be addressing it under board reports. I think what the Health Insurance Committee is looking for is some hard guidance from this board as to what our desires are for the future funding of health insurance. So I suspect over the course of the next 2 to 3 months, that'll be a discussion that planning will bring forward to the board, get some direction from the board to bring back to the committee, so that they then, you know, right now the only guidance they've really had from us is try to make it go up no more than our revenue does each year. That's the general guidance we gave them a few years ago. Unfortunately, that's not very doable at all, because our revenues are creeping up at 2.5% to 3% per year, and the cost of health insurance is going up probably double to triple that. So we as a board really need to think through what is it we expect our health plan to do, and that may be changes in the future on how we address a single versus a family. But those are board level discussions that once planning's had the opportunity to really weigh in and then get back to the board, so we can get back to the Health Insurance Committee with that guidance. I think the goal long-term, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we want to have at least 6 months of claims in our fund balance, and
That's
more
correct.
would be better.
Yeah, more would be better, definitely. But thank you, Jim, for clarifying that. Yes, that was one thing I was going to ask from the board and whatever committee, that we do have some guidance and direction from the board as far as where we should be at when we are looking at the plan, as far as the percentage of increase that the board is looking at or recommends that we should come into as far as presenting to you as far as your cost, and where we should be as far as you know, dollar-wise in the fund balance and so forth and that. We work closely with Jackie, but it would be really helpful for us when we do get together as a committee to have that guidance spelled out for us.
Dr. Gandhi, you had a comment?
Sure, and I just want to be clear with the board, I don't sit on the committee, so Karen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I really think for us, and at least in the conversations I've had after the fact, there's 3 goals, and one is solvency, and we define solvency by at least 6 months in the fund balance, but then the second piece is solvency is not always relying on one plan to cover the cost or the loss of the other plan. The second piece is sustainability for us as a district, and I know that last year the Health Insurance Committee did have an opportunity to visit about looking at some other consulting things or looking at some other things, and just it happened right during COVID, so I think that's a conversation that they want to continue as we look at sustainability down the road for the plan. And I think the most important piece here as it relates to health insurance, and you'll see this the last couple of years in our district as well, is that we are trying to use the plan and the recommendations and the numbers to drive human behavior and education on what is most effective for us as a district. And somehow that model needs to flip a little bit, where the better we are at understanding the health premiums that are offered to our employees and the way they utilize those services, that's going to dictate what the numbers are. So it's also that behavior component as well, which is drives some of the conversation.
That is correct. It's been one of our main discussions as far as how we get that education piece out there and people understanding the health insurance.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? All right, Anne Marie, could you please call the roll?
Johnson,
Yes.
Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Robin Nelson,
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Paulson?
Yes.
Benson?
Yes.
Gullickson?
Yes.
Holden?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes, motion passes. Item B is the operational plan for the 2020-21 year.
Can I just say thank you, everybody? I'll relay that information back to the committee.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I should have acknowledged your work and your presentation. All right, on to item B, the operational plan for 2020-21, and that's Memo 37. Dr. Gandhi.
Sure. At the last board meeting, we provided the first reading of the operational plan for this school year. So at this time, we are asking that you approve the operational plan as is. I will be honest and just say that later today, after the materials were already posted, was notified of, Dr. Denise Jonas, our director for Cass County CTE, said that she might want to make a tweak to one of the CTE objectives. It's just really clarifying one of the objectives in there, so that might be something that we change after the board approval, if that's okay, but just want to let the board know that as well. And it's really more of just the wording on one of the objectives that relates to her department. But our recommendation at this point would be we're seeking the board's approval on the operational plan as provided.
Is there a motion? Jim?
I move that we accept the 2021 operational plan as outlined in Memo 37.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second, and as was indicated, we had a first reading of this at the August 25th meeting, and there really were not any significant changes or adjustments. Does anyone have any discussion or questions to add at this point? It looks like we're ready to vote. Anne Marie?
Brian Nelson?
Yes.
Robin Nelson?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Paulson?
Yes.
Brian Nelson?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes, motion passes. On to the last item of our business, bond sale for the Explorer Academy, Memo 39, and this comes to us from Jackie Gapp and Dr. Gandhi.
I'll let Jackie go to get started, but as you'll see in the memo, we're extremely pleased. We have a really favorable sale for the bonds for the Explorer Academy, and then is PFM here?
Ann is right there. So,
I'm sorry.
Yes, Ann Willett from PFM, which is the firm that we use to help us issue our public debt, is here to go over the bond sale. And like Rupak mentioned, there's some exciting news. You did get an updated board memo on your at your spot that has more of the details of the actual sale. So Ann, it's all yours.
And Ann, I'm sorry, it's bright lights, so that's why I'm missing here.
That's okay.
And you also blend in perfectly with the podium.
Yeah. Oh, and the podium. Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, President Knutson, School Board, Dr. Gandhi, and of course, Business Manager Gap. Like Dr. Gandhi said, and like Jackie said, we received 3 bids, and the low bid was a great rate. So maybe I'll back up a little bit. Over the last month or so, we've been preparing to take bids on the bonds for the Explorer Academy. We went to market with $12 million, and based on the results today, you actually will be issuing $11.2 million rather than $12 million to get to the $12 million that you need for the project. So great news there. I will start with the results. So the 3 bidders that bid were the Baker Group, Robert W. Baird, and Morgan Stanley. The Baker Group was the low bid, and their low bid was 1.65%. To give you a little bit of context, those are, we're issuing 20-year bonds at 1.65%. A year ago, when we did the refinancing, I believe they were 12-year bonds, and they were about 2.5% for 12 years. So that just gives you a little bit of context on where rates are today. They're the lowest we've seen ever. Even my colleagues that have been in the business a lot longer than I have, they haven't seen rates this low either. So it's a great time to issue debt and to take advantage of the really low rates. Let's see here. So the payments will be about $100,000 less than what we even projected in July, which is also great news. And they will be about $715,000 or so. Do you all have any questions about the process, or kind of give you any context, any additional context to the bond sale?
Anyone have any questions? No. Jim?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that we execute the attached resolution authorizing the establishing of the terms of the limited tax school bonds, building bonds, Series 2020, as outlined in memo number 39.
Is there anyone that would like to make a second that is not in my immediate view?
Second.
Who is that? Is that Brian? Brian's going to second this one. Thank you, Brian. All right. Now I guess we have time for any other discussion. All right, hearing none. Thank you, Ann, for being here. And Anne Marie, please call the roll.
Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Benson.
No.
Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Robin Nelson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes, motion passes. Thanks again for being here, Ann. All right, moving on to board reports. The first item is the appointment of the NDSBA, North Dakota School Board Association Convention delegates, and individuals from the board indicated to Anne Marie their ability to serve as delegates to that convention, which will be a virtual delegate assembly at 3 p.m. October 30th. There were 6 of us that said that we would be willing to serve. Jim, you will be part of the state delegation, correct? So the 5 individuals, and we do need 5, that said they'd be willing to serve would consist of Nikki Gullickson, Seth Holden, Robin Nelson, Tracy Newman, and myself. So I would recommend that the 5 of us are the convention delegates, and it looks like this is not something we need to vote on, but thank you very much for everyone that has volunteered their time on that. And also, I know we have new board members attending the new member seminar. That's October 5th, 9th, 13th, 15th. You have some options of some half-day sessions there. And then most of us are scheduled for the school law seminar. That is 5 sessions over 5 days, October 26th through the 30th, from 1 to 2:30 p.m. So thank you with your involvement on that. It looks like we will be receiving ballots for the Board of Directors election, and that we will be mailing those in. So we should look for those. Robin?
In the past, we've had 4 delegates and one alternate. Is it a little different this year with the virtual?
Anne Marie, do you have comments, please?
Fargo Public Schools can have 5 delegates, and then usually we designate everybody else as alternates in case somebody couldn't get out to Bismarck or something of that nature. So because of our size, Fargo Public Schools gets 5 delegates.
Thank you.
Okay, Robin, thank you for the question. We should be set with that. I will like to have us move on to the committee liaison and correspondence reports then. Nikki, are you at the far end of the table for board members? Okay, why don't you go first and we'll work our way down the line. Thank you.
Yes, I got moved this week. They're keeping an eye on me down here. I'm happy to report that the Communications, Engagement, and Advocacy Committee was able to meet last week. We had everybody there, everybody excited and engaged, focused on creating strong, stable guidelines that FPS can use in any instance where it makes sense to reevaluate a named space or building. As you've heard earlier, admin presented a great revision of AP 3260 and has also developed and added to that renaming guidelines, which did not previously exist. The committee will meet again this week, Thursday morning at 7:30, to now utilize those guidelines that we have put in place for the purpose of evaluating the naming situation of the Woodrow Wilson building. And due to the pressing nature of the Woodrow Wilson, as shown by those who presented this evening, we will be meeting a little more often than we may after this pressing situation, but we wanted to get right on it right up front. So we're going to meet a little bit more often, and then we'll maybe slow down a bit, but get the wheels rolling.
All right, thank you, Nikki. Brian, are you next?
Sure. Thank you, board members, for attending the conference, NDSBA, that you're going to be attending. I've gone to that about 24 years. It's a great conference. You learn lots. They do a good job down there. So I hope it's a good experience for you all. I attended a planning meeting on August 28th, and that's been part of my work. And the other part of the work, as you know, is reading all of the emails about all of the things going on in Fargo Public Schools. And so it's a lot of time taken to sort through all this information, but it's well worth it. So that's about it.
Thank you, Brian. Nikki, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, did I mess that up? Am I supposed to tell you what I did too? Or was it just committee?
If you have something else you would like to share regarding liaison, that would be fine.
Well, I have been no slough, so I'll share that with you. I've started 3 kids in 3 different schools, so that's been quite an experience. Centennial, Discovery, and Davies, all each unique, all have their own, the kids and the schools, their own unique processes and everything, so that's been a learning experience. September 1st, I attended the chamber event with the superintendent speaking. I enjoyed that. September 2nd, I went to A Million Cups to hear a little bit about the Clara Barton homeroom. On September 3rd, we had our committee meeting. Also on September 3rd, through the state DPI, I attended the ESSA subcommittee on school climate. Sorry, I forgot it to begin with.
Thank you for that update, Nikki. Robin?
Thank you. August 27th, I attended the P12 Alliance meeting. We meet every other week. This is really about how to connect traditionally disengaged families in the virtual learning environment and help their children succeed. September 1st, the eggs and issues with the superintendent. Like Nikki, on September 2nd, we had our daughter start at South High. She was excited to be back, but she's pretty low maintenance now, so she just kind of does her own thing. I stay out of her way. September 3rd, I did call in to the Community Engagement and Advocacy Committee just to listen in. Thank you, Nikki, that you did a great job leading your first committee meeting. September 8th, the Instructional Committee met, that's today, and I'm an alternate on that, so again, I don't get to chime in, but a couple of things became very apparent, and it was, as the superintendent referred to earlier, the contact tracing and subsequent quarantines are what are going to affect where we are in this school district. I had a personal experience with a close contact last week, and I started to think through, If I were to have symptoms, I would need to quarantine for 10 days, and then my husband, because he's a close contact, would have to quarantine for those 10 days plus another 14. So really, the ripple effects of all of the quarantining really is where this affects what we do in our schools and our entire community. So we do hear a lot of people say our kids are generally healthy, they can handle this, but we need to remember the ripple effects from that, because they are pretty extreme. And then I also learned how complex secondary education delivery is. It's much more complicated than elementary. And then today also there was a town hall. Superintendent Baszler, North Dakota Healthy Return to School, talked a lot about how the school districts would handle these close contacts. We're fortunate in Fargo that our administration really takes care of that. A lot of board members do that through the state of North Dakota. Let's see here. GAC, from a federal level, there are a couple highlights right now for governmental affairs. There's discussion around whether to include or refuse to include 1619 curriculum in U.S. history. The third federal judge did reject Secretary DeVos's wishes to add increased pandemic relief for private schools. The first meeting of the Governmental Affairs Committee is Friday, September 18th. I think I have that date right, at 7:30 a.m. That will be our formative meeting, and then we'll work on some future regular meeting dates. And I believe that is all.
All right, thank you, Robin. Jim?
Well, first of all, I want to start by extending mine, and I think the entire board's thanks to Fargo South for letting us invade the theater to use it as our pseudo boardroom so we can have the audience here. And a big shout out to Bill Westrick and the IT people who had to adapt to this new location. And a huge thanks to Dave Wilhelmy, and the monitors back here are working perfect. That being said, and of course I'm a pretty proud South High Bruin graduate, this is a great building to be in. Since we last met, State GAC Committee met. We reauthorized all of the resolutions that are up for readoption this year, and there's one new resolution that will come before the Delegate Assembly for consideration, having to do with potential time limits on the negotiation process. Planning Committee met, as you've heard from others. We will be having another planning meeting probably sometime in the next couple of weeks. It depends a little bit on getting some mapping done on some boundary changes and conversations board members are having with Bob. Once Bob tells me he's good to go on that, I'll be working with Joanne to get a planning meeting scheduled. Just kind of for calendar watchers, my guess is right now we will not be bringing that forward probably until our October board meeting. I doubt we're going to get this all done by September 22nd, so probably the first meeting in October, but I'll certainly share that at governance, Rebecca, as we get closer. The Western region of the National School Boards Association has a couple of meetings going on this week. Our nominating process for our regional delegates to the National Nominating Committee, and ultimately any board positions at the national level. We have our first meeting on September 10th and a follow-up meeting on September 18th. The National School Boards Association had a listening session for state leaders, really to talk about some of the big structural changes they're anticipating at the national level. That happened on August 27th. I did get to attend Eggs and Issues, which I thought you did, as usual, an outstanding job. And from Planning Committee, our work objectives that we identified at our first meeting, number one is to really put the nuts and bolts on the different boundary scenarios board members have requested and those that the administration brought forward. And as I mentioned, I'm hopeful we'll be prepared to bring that onto the board agenda for October 13th. Really work to figure out the parameters that the board might want to recommend to the Health Insurance Committee going forward, what options we might want them to explore. There's a desire by members of the committee, and I think by the negotiating committee as well, to really work towards finding a sustainable long-term salary schedule for our staff. One of the other projects that kind of goes hand in hand with what administration is doing is really looking at the standard of efforts report and measuring our efforts versus other districts. So that'll be something the committee will take a look at. And then we need to prepare for updating the long-range financial plan, really from a perspective of two different areas. We have a mill levy vote that will be on us before we know it, so we need to really address what would our plan look like with a positive vote, what might it look like if we have a negative vote. And then hand in hand with that is it really to set some probably further parameters on fund balance. What's the minimum expectation the board has for a fund balance? What's the targeted number? And what's the goal number? And last but certainly not least, we suspect we'll have some work to do as we move forward with the thought of decommissioning Agassiz and finding new homes for the programs that are located there. So those are the things that came up at our first planning meeting. Of course, this board will probably give us more work through the course of the year, or the administration may have more things they need planning to spend time on as well. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Jim. That's a good list to get started with, though. Let's see, David, and then we'll move on through to Tracy.
I attended planning as well, and I have a question, I think probably to Dr. Gandhi. Our liaison visits, now my understanding is that visitors are not welcome in the schools. Can we as board members go to our liaison schools, or should we wait until some of these measures are lifted?
So, as you know, we are allowing essential visitors, and they do have to fill out a more detailed sign-in sheet, which we're actually starting to send those out ahead of time, because if in case we need to use them for contact tracing, we'll hold on to them 2 weeks after your visit. My recommendation would be just to reach out to the principal directly, because if you're in the building but you're able to be physically distant and 6 feet away from interacting with others, I think that's not a problem, because then you're not a close contact. So some principals might prefer that you come and set up an opportunity for you to visit with them and other staff members. Other principals might say, hey, why don't we do something virtual, and I might have some teachers log on to Zoom. So I will leave it up to their autonomy, and I think if you reach out to that principal, that works.
All right, David, thank you. Jennifer.
Very good question. Thank you for asking. Okay, so I just first want to acknowledge and thank all of the community members that have reached out to us on these important issues. There's been hundreds, really, of emails and phone calls that we've all received in regards to COVID and boundaries and school naming, and community engagement is a key factor in all three, and then some. So I appreciate them taking the time to reach out to us and participate in that those important conversations. And although not all maybe receive timely responses from us because there are so many, I have read them, and I believe that each one of us has done that. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to say that. Secondly, I did attend planning and community and advocacy committee meeting, as well as virtually the eggs and issues in September. So. And that is all. I was going to ask the same question as David, so I have my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth.
Yes, I want to thank David for asking that question too. So that's been on my mind too lately. September 28th, I attended planning committee meeting for the first time, and also on September 3rd, the communications engagement and advocacy meeting. And also, I'd like to report that Lunch Aid was a success this year as we met our goal of $20,000, so I'm pretty happy about that. And also, now that we do have policy in place for our rescinding and renaming issue, I'm excited to attend Thursday's meeting. So, Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Tracy?
All right, last but not least, September 1st, I also attended Eggs and Issues and want to commend Dr. Gandhi for doing a great job representing us in that. September 2nd, I too had 3 children start at 2 different schools. September 3rd, I was a part of the Communications Engagement and Advocacy Committee meeting. And then this morning, September 8th, we had our COVID-19 Instructional Plan Committee meeting, which people have already spoke to, but I think it went really well. I just wanted to say that the Sanford is holding a Boo to the Flu event here at South High School. You can wear your costume and get a flu vaccine and get Halloween giveaways on October 24th. And then I just wanted to end on a positive note. I reached out to my liaison principals just to get kind of a And then lastly, I just reached out to my children's own principal, Dr. Hansen at Centennial, and her quote was, "The first couple of weeks have gone, all caps, so well. Probably the best start of my 21 years in education." She shared with me many teacher and staff comments, and one I wanted to end on was a direct quote from a teacher. "I feel we did an amazing job at welcoming students back and making them feel loved, safe, and missed." So I just personally want to really commend our educators for how hard this work has been the past week and this week, and all the energy and time they are putting into this. Our community, students, and families just really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, my report consists of a few items. First of all, a reminder of our work session that's October 12th. It will be at in the boardroom at the district office from 8 a.m. to about noon. The topics include policy governance model and budget considerations, and we each have 2 books at our chairs, at our seats, that we are charged with reading through, reviewing in preparation for that work session. Jim is leading us in our discussion. As they've said, these are the Cliff Notes versions, so we should all be able to get through them easily. But thank you again, Jim, ahead of time for helping to guide us through that process. I wanted to mention a few other things regarding monitoring reports. Anne Marie has had to ride herd on a few of us, including myself, to get some of those reports in on time. And I just want us to, and again, myself, a commitment to work more diligently to get those turned in per the request, per the deadline. There's so much, we should always be doing that, but there's so much additional work that needs to be done with COVID that the most we can do to pay attention to helping to ease and kind of help that workflow go a little bit more smoothly, I would appreciate it, and I am certain that she would as well. But I'm willing to admit my own failure on that. So we all did get ours turned in, and thanks for hanging with us, Anne Marie. Another reminder is about doing our business in public and the importance to do so. I just want us all to be cognizant about conversations that are easy to have outside of the board room, outside of our board meetings. Any text conversations, phone, email, social media, Facebook, anything that can be potentially seen as us doing our business outside of the boardroom is not something that we are allowed to do. And anyone can be very critical of that. It might be something that we're not doing at all, but it might look like it is. And it's hard to show that we're not doing that. So that also includes conversations that we have here, even in our board meetings. It's easy to, if we're sitting next to someone, it's easy to scoot over and maybe share a comment or something. That's something that we just cannot do. We really need to make sure that we are doing our business in the public. So if you have any questions, just ask me, but it happens every once in a while, and it's so easy, and it's with good intentions, but just for us to keep in mind that that's something that's not appropriate. And then I will be at the Thursday meeting for Communications, Engagement, and Advocacy, again, September 10th at 10:30 in the morning. There is a NDSBA September Lunch and Learn that I signed up for, September 16th. It's on school liability and insurance overview. Board Member Newman forwarded to us some information on an item that is September 20th regarding immigrant law, the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, a Zoom panel discussion on immigrants and refugees' experiences in the area. I'm hoping to join in on that. Last Thursday, the Native American Commission met. What I thought was of particular interest was an update that came from Laura Oster-Alland. She is a provost at NDSU, and she gave a brief update as to the development of NDSU's land acknowledgement statement and other Indigenous efforts. And they will be coming back to the Native American Commission to announce to us the finalized land acknowledgement statement. But I'm looking forward to hearing that and learning how they are planning to implement that throughout the NDSU community, website, publications, how they'll be sharing that land acknowledgement statement in various events that the campus has, and ultimately charging us as a district to potentially think about doing something like that ourselves. Just as information, that committee it's an 11-member committee of faculty, staff, and students. 7 of them are Native Americans. They hope to roll that statement out in the fall, and it will be a statement of relationship, how NDSU's relationship is tied to the Native land that campus sits on. And again, let's see here, also at that Native American Commission meeting, I shared the calendar for Fargo Public Schools, West Fargo Public Schools Indian Education Program that was provided to me by Melody Stabner. And I also want to thank everyone that has shared their thoughts with us over the now that we've started the school year, but even getting into the school year regarding items that we've discussed, COVID, the naming, just so many things, so much communication that we've been receiving from our constituents, and really appreciate it. And yes, the attention to detail on the quick responses. Sometimes it's a little slower than we'd like, but I'm also trying to provide detailed information to individuals. So again, thank you. And in regard to the chamber presentation, Dr. Gandhi, I thought that was an excellent illustration of how the 3 school districts visit and collaborate. That's a question that we receive sometimes. Why is your district doing it this way and the others are the other, and don't they ever talk to each other? And yes, it's clearly evident that there's lots of collaboration, even though maybe the end outcome isn't the same. But there's lots of dialogue and lots of collaboration, so that was one of the main takeaways that I took from that. Thank you for your time on that. And I don't have anything else. David?
As it relates to my undue diligence this year in completing GPs and ELs on time, one of the things that really helped me last year and has helped me in the preceding years is at the end of every board meeting, we always received a president's report with upcoming dates and events, and on that it would always list the homework and the days that it was due. And I put it in my calendar immediately, and I could remember it that way. I would really like to see that come back again.
Thank you, David, for that. Anne Marie, you and I can visit about that. I know that's something that she worked diligently on for many years. I'm happy to collaborate if you'd like to on that. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Rupak.
Just one thing, I know, I fully recognize, I think I've given the board 3 books in the last week to read. So first off, thank you. I'm not trying to give you a lot of homework. But secondly, I think the reason I provide the research to you is because when the board makes significant decisions that impact our decision or our district, I want you to be aware of some research and foundational things. Nothing in the book means that administration is recommending that we have to follow to a T. My job is to just make sure that the board has the materials and the resources or the research they need to make informed, data-driven decisions. But please note that our district is always going to be unique. Every district is unique. So don't consider anything a full endorsement to every letter in every book, but I provide that as a resource so we can have rich conversations moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi. Anything else? All right, our next meeting is September 22nd, and Anne Marie, is it also in this theater?
Yes, we will operate here until further notice, or unless I tell you otherwise in an email. There are some potential conflicts in this location in the coming months, but yet they might not be there depending upon what instructional plan level we're in and what happens with some events. So just plan on here unless you're told otherwise.
Okay, that sounds good. We're adjourned. Is it 7:40? It's hard to see the clock from here. Okay, 7:40 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.